Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Aric Fenske. I am the Executive Director of Lutherans for Life. I am joined by Josiah and Katie Coblentz. We had an event a few weeks ago up in Concordia University, Wisconsin, and Katie and Josiah spoke for us. And her story was so compelling, we just had to have her back and record this presentation for all of you to see. So, welcome to Josiah and Katie. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It's always a pleasure.
Great. So, Katie, do you want to just take a few moments and maybe introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your story before we begin?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Katie, obviously, and I am what some people might call a detransitioner, which means that at some point in my life, I identified myself as transgender and I took steps to actually transition, or I underwent medical and surgical interventions to try to become more like a man. I'm biologically female, so for me, that would have been living as a man. And I went through that process of I changed my name, I changed my pronouns, that's the social transition. And then I actually even changed my legal documents to reflect those changes. I took testosterone and I had surgery to try to appear more masculine before I ultimately decided, hey, this is not the right path for me. And I went back and decided I'll live as a woman again.
Okay. Wow, that's just unbelievable story. So, can you maybe go into a little bit more detail, kind of tell us how you got here and how you started speaking on this?
Yeah, well, when I first started in the transgender identity, I was watching a lot of social media videos, a lot of YouTube, and just coming across all these people, all these young women just like me, who were feeling uncomfortable in their bodies. They didn't know where they fit in. They're reaching their young adulthood and they don't know kind of where to go in life. They don't feel like they fit in anywhere. And that was exactly my story. And I think that resonates with a lot of people, especially now when they hear, oh yeah, social media had a huge impact on you, as it does for a lot of young people. But anyway, I got into the transgender thing through this social media avenue, decided, oh yeah, I am just as uncomfortable. And I started going to my doctor. I said I need a referral for a gender clinic, which she got me. The gender clinic almost immediately was able to start me on testosterone. And a year after starting on testosterone, I got the approval for top surgery, which is a double mastectomy. And it all happened so fast. And the whole time, I felt like I was on top of the world. The effects from testosterone felt amazing. They felt euphoric instead of dysphoric, which is uncomfortable. It's a discomfort in your body. And the top surgery, the double mastectomy, made me feel exactly the same way. And I think when people see that contrast in my story, where I'm doing this stuff, I'm giving into my dysphoria, I'm kind of feeding this discomfort, this depression, anxiety, whatever you want to call it. I'm feeding into this and I'm feeling a million times better. And then the moment the effects kind of start to plateau, then I'm dropping back into this depressive spiral. I think a lot of people can see that difference and that also resonates with them, I think. And they understand that this is something really serious and this is a pit that anybody can fall into.
Sure. So, would you mind just maybe briefly, if it's not too personal, but when you first started thinking about transitioning, I mean, what was that like for you? What were you feeling? You mentioned kind of a depressive state, peaks and valleys before. So is that what you were kind of feeling at the beginning of the whole thing? You said you felt kind of uncomfortable with your body. Can you describe a little bit what that was like?
Yeah, well, at the time, I definitely would have said I was very deeply, I don't know, you know what? I don't know if I would have said I was deeply depressed, but definitely anxious, a lot of anxiety, a lot of discomfort about myself, about my body. And I probably would have told you back then that it was to the extreme. And maybe you could say because I felt it was to the extreme than it actually was. But now I can look back and realize no, my reasons for feeling like that was that puberty was uncomfortable and I was being fed this lie on social media that it's not supposed to be.
Sure.
And so that was just normal. That was just a normal amount of discomfort and anxiety that every teenager is going to have across the entire world, really. And I was also, because of the changes that were happening in my body during puberty, I started to become a little bit more uncomfortable with myself because things are changing. You need to adapt to these changes. So I'm becoming more uncomfortable, more anxious. And then right around the time I was starting high school, there was this push for, at least at my high school, I went to a big public high school, this push for more sexual relationships. And so you start on birth control right away. And that made me sort of overcorrect
Sure.
and say, I'm not comfortable for this. And therefore, there must be something wrong with me that I don't want to have these relationships with people. And so I actually started to identify myself as bisexual or lesbian in high school. And I was just kind of trying on these identities. And that pushed the sexual conversation away for a certain amount of time. So I was 14, 15, able to avoid this. And 16, 17, still kind of able to avoid it, but more questions were coming up with the whole LGBT thing. And then by the time I was 18, I guess you could say I had overcorrected so much that I started to identify myself not as gay or lesbian or whatever you have there, but just as transgender, which means I wasn't even calling myself a woman anymore. I was just saying I'm a man. And
Okay.
that's how far removed from myself I had gotten.
Sure. So you had mentioned that you went in to a clinic to receive some testosterone, and you'd also mentioned this feeling of discomfort, and you had mentioned that that was just kind of what normally happens to kids when they go through puberty. Um, was that ever brought up when you went to see the doctors? Was there any kind of um, any notion of a corrective or any kind of, hey, maybe let's not go so fast. This is just normal feelings. What was that like when you talked with the doctors?
I initially went to my regular doctor. I told her that I'm transgender and that I needed a referral. And then when I got to the clinic where they would handle all that, I told them all my reasons that I thought I was transgender and that I'd watched all these videos and I knew what the diagnosis looked like. I knew what the symptoms looked like. I knew all this stuff. And one of their questions, because they had to do, I didn't have a therapist, but I was supposed to in order to start on testosterone. So the gender clinic set me up with an in-office clinician, one of their people in the office. I would just have a 45-minute appointment with her. I think it was 45, but don't quote me on that. I'd have an appointment with her and she was able to diagnose and basically check off on the testosterone. And that's what I did. And one of the things that I believe she asked me or I brought it up and then we talked about it was the feelings of discomfort during puberty. And I attested to the fact that I felt very, very uncomfortable during puberty and it didn't feel quite right. And that was one of the criteria that she put on her report, uh, saying that I have gender dysphoria, which is just the diagnosis that comes along with being transgender most of the time.
So it was essentially a self-diagnosis from you, and she just went along with it.
Essentially, yes, that's exactly right.
Okay. So what was it like for you then, um, when you tried living as a man? Did you change your name, appearance, I mean, activities?
Not so much activities, but I did change my name from Katie to Caden, which was a very simple change. I was not going to do Caden at first. I thought it was too similar to my name, Katie, and I hated my name because I didn't want a girl's name. But my family said half the time they call for me and I don't even answer them with Katie. So it can't be too different for me to get used to. So we kind of all settled on Caden together and I decided to spell it with a C instead of a K. My reason for that is the most ridiculous thing. You can see it's the mindset of a teenager. I thought that the K was for girls and the C was for boys. I don't know why I thought that, but I did. So I went ahead with the name Caden. I told everybody to start calling me male pronouns, so he, him instead of she, her, if anybody's familiar with how the pronouns work. And for the most part, people did. They didn't know one way or another. This was back, I was 18 at this point, and this is back in 2014, might have been 2015. It was one of those years. And so there just wasn't as much about transgenderism. It was just kind of starting to come out. You had the Bruce Jenner, Caitlyn Jenner sort of thing, and people were seeing all over the news, well, this stuff is to be supported and celebrated. And so my family kind of reluctantly hopped on board with it. And they're like, ah, well, you're 18, you've thought about this, you've done your research. They didn't know my research was just a bunch of YouTube videos. But anyway, I went ahead and I changed my name, I changed my pronouns, I changed my birth certificate to reflect my new name. And instead of female, my birth certificate, I was able to change it to say male. Same thing with my license. I changed my social security card, the name on my social security card. I changed everything. And I really didn't get much pushback. I think, again, because it was 2014, 2015, and people just didn't know.
Right. So having the testosterone and doing the surgeries, did that make you feel more comfortable in your body?
Yes, it did. The testosterone, the first thing I noticed, and you can still hear it now, is my voice started to get deeper. My how do I say it? I was just stronger overall. I was physically stronger just by taking the testosterone. And you could tell my shoulders were a little bit more rounded out. So anything I was doing outside, I would play pickup games with my friends or something. I play basketball, play street hockey, and I was better at those sports that I really liked to play. So overall, the testosterone made me feel absolutely amazing. I sounded more like a boy. I looked more like a boy. I don't, it changes the way that your fat is distributed in your body enough that you can look more like the opposite sex
Sure.
a little bit here and there. But because I was already fairly lean, my overall body shape looked kind of androgynous, but it looked masculine enough. My face shape changed. I think the fat was redistributed in my face or something. And so my face looked a little bit more masculine. And I was able to go about day to day. And most people, after about a year or two on testosterone, did not realize that I was transgender. Would they realize now, being more exposed to the transgender thing? Maybe. But in 2015, they were not noticing that I was actually a female. Most people thought that I was a male. Same thing with the surgery. After the effects of testosterone, they, I was noticing my voice, I was noticing the change in my muscles and the change in my strength, even the change in my emotional well being, where I didn't have the access to so many emotions that I felt more level all the time. Those effects kind of started to plateau at one point. I wasn't noticing any new changes. So that feeling of dysphoria went away. And I was sort of falling back into this dysphoria feeling.
Sure.
With that, the dysphoria started to, it's weird to explain, but just try to picture it if you can, started to centralize itself around my chest and around my breast. So I went back to the gender clinic. This is almost exactly a year to the day I started testosterone. And I told them my dysphoria is causing a lot of discomfort with my chest and I need top surgery, a double mastectomy. They right away, I think I still had an appointment because I didn't have a therapist. I had another appointment with the person in the office, if I'm not mistaken. And she again signed off on the surgery. And I was able to go to a hospital down in Boston. I'm from Massachusetts. So I went to the hospital in Boston and they were able to do a double mastectomy, no problem. And after that, when my chest was finally flat and I saw it in the mirror, and this feeling of euphoria again just came over me, this wave of euphoria, because after that surgery, I felt emotionally freed from that dysphoria that was localized in my chest, but also I was physically freed from having to bind my chest or wear these compression shirts. Most people will call them binders. They're these compression tops that you wear to make your chest appear flat. They are not comfortable. They're not even really healthy to wear. And being able to take that off and just wear a t-shirt all summer long and not have to have this extra layer of compression, that felt amazing. That felt physically freeing. And overall, after that top surgery and still taking the testosterone, that euphoria and being able to pass, as they say, in public as a male, I rode that wave for years. I think I want to say 4 years before anything else even came up. I was just so happy with where I was in my transition, so solid in this new identity that I built for myself that I didn't see anything changing anytime soon.
Sure. But eventually it did change, right? Because then you had another surgery after that. So can you take us through that
Yes.
step?
Yes, eventually it did change. I can't remember exactly. it was 4 or 5 years after the top surgery, so that would make it about 5 or 6 years taking the testosterone. The first time I noticed it, I think I was outside playing basketball maybe, it could have been anything, but I think it was basketball, and I started to get very bad abdominal pain, and I was doubled over this day in pain, not able to move, not able to alleviate the pain in any way. So I stopped playing and I went back home and I'm trying to just, figure out what's going on. And eventually the pain stopped. But after that, almost every time I would try to do any physical activity, I would get this really bad pain. Sometimes, even if I sneezed and I was standing up too straight, I would get a bad pain in my abdomen. So I did what I normally did for my research is I looked it up on YouTube, all of my favorite YouTubers who were talking about their transgender journey, kind of documenting their transition. I looked it up to see if they had posted anything ever of getting this abdominal pain. And I came across a few people who were talking about it. And from my understanding, but I could be wrong because I don't really know much about anything medical. But from my understanding, the testosterone had caused my uterus to shrivel up and it started tugging on anything it was attached to, muscles, tendons, I don't know, but that's what was causing the pain. And so I called the gender clinic. They only do same day appointments, so I had to call them in the morning and try to get in for an appointment that day. And they do same day because they get a lot of cancellations or no-shows. So if you do same day, you'll show up. So I went ahead, I scheduled for that day, drove myself into Boston, told the gender clinic what was going on. I said, I think it's my uterus. And the doctor, it was the physician this time, not a nurse. He said, it is time for a hysterectomy. Maybe he didn't say it in those words, but he was explaining to me at every point in a transgender male, which means woman, in a transgender male's experience, he will have to undergo a hysterectomy at some point, is how he explained it to me. And it was just my turn to have a hysterectomy. And so I thought, well, all right, then I'll go ahead and do it. So we were able to schedule a hysterectomy for the summer of 2020. That I actually do remember because the whole world was shut down, but I was able to get the gender affirming hysterectomy. So we were able to schedule a hysterectomy for the summer of 2020. And that included, and I consented to this, the removal of my uterus, cervix, fallopian tubes, and both of my ovaries. My reasoning for just going ahead and removing basically all of the organs was my risk for cancer was very, very elevated from having taken the testosterone. And I was also thinking, I'm a man, which means I don't need this stuff. Men don't need cervix, ovaries, uterus, all this kind of stuff. Men don't need it. I don't need it. I don't want it. And so I figured we'll just get it all taken out. And I was happy with that choice, not realizing that men actually do need that stuff. Just, they marry a woman for that. And that was not something that ever occurred to me. It also never occurred to me that I would be married, especially not to a man.
Right.
So that was just so far from my thought process. So I went ahead, I had the hysterectomy. And if you don't mind, I'm going to tell a little bit more about the hysterectomy. Right after the surgery, it was supposed to be an outpatient surgery. And they had me in recovery, kind of ready to send me home right after that. The surgery was in the morning, so maybe this was late morning or early afternoon. I'm in recovery and they want to send me home. I started getting worse and worse and worse, and they decided they would actually admit me to the hospital and keep me overnight just to see my condition, see how it all goes. So they did, and good thing they did, because they discovered hours later, this I believe would have been at night on the day of the surgery or early morning the next day, but I want to say it was the night of the surgery day. They were noticing while I'm starting to lose consciousness that my blood pressure is dropping and my heart rate is just increasing a lot. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was very, very high. My blood pressure was very, very low. I started losing consciousness. I'm kind of drifting in and out of consciousness. The nurses or the doctor, whoever does it, ordered an abdominal ultrasound to see what was going on. And they saw that I just had blood pooling in my abdomen because they discovered one of my arteries had been cut open and not fixed, or they nicked it and didn't even know it was open, something along those lines. and they had to rush me back in for emergency surgery. And then I needed 3 blood transfusions before I could leave the hospital. And the whole time that that was happening, my parents were essentially waiting by the phone to find out if I was dead or alive, because they knew what was going. My parents knew that I was having the surgery. I think I even lived with them at the time, though I could be wrong. I could have been at my apartment by that time. Just like a lot of millennials, I've moved back and forth, my parents' house to another apartment, my parents' house to another apartment. But anyway, they knew what was going on, and they actually, when I was unconscious and they realized I needed the surgery, called my parents, called my mom to see if she could come in and sign off on it, because they didn't think I would wake up.
Wow.
But she didn't end up having to. I was able to wake up somehow, sign it, and then my parents just had to wait to find out if I'd survived this or not. And it was just a devastating ordeal for all of. Obviously, I did survive. I'm telling the story, so I did survive it. But it was just, it was terrifying. It was traumatizing, I'm sure, for my parents. And, because it was my transition and I just cared so much about it and building this identity, I didn't even realize. And if I did realize, I may have not even cared what it had done to the people in my family, caused them to worry, caused them to hurt. I mean, it was just absolutely devastating that night that they're waiting by the phone. If you're a parent, you can imagine
Yeah.
just waiting for that call to find out if your child is even alive and preparing yourself for the worst. Um, I can't even imagine it, what I
Yeah.
did to my parents.
Right.
But anyway, after the hysterectomy, my mind still had not changed. I still was like, you know what, this was tough, but I'm not planning any more surgeries. So we're just good. We're just gonna keep going from this point, and I'm happy with my transition. Everything's good. So even that hysterectomy was not a wake-up call for me. It was, oh boy, now I'm gonna get my years mixed up. So I'm not even gonna try. But it was after that, either a number of months or maybe a full year, something after that, that I just went to get a normal haircut appointment. And I went to my normal barber. I always stress this when I tell my story, because my barber is very good. Well, I don't actually go to her anymore, but she is very, very, very skilled. And I got a very basic men's haircut. So every month I would go in, maybe it was a month, maybe it was 5 or 6 weeks, I don't know. And I would get your standard haircut. And she always did a great job, and she did a great job this time. And I just paid her and tipped her and went on my way. I was going to go home and take a shower. I was going to work the night shift that night. So I was just going to get the hairs off the back of my neck. And that was that. I was going to go to work. But when I got home and I'm looking in the mirror right before I'm about to take a shower, I was just staring at my face, and I just felt like something's wrong here. What is wrong? I was seeing myself for the first time in my adult life as a woman. And I didn't know why, because the testosterone had changed me enough that I didn't necessarily look like a woman. You could sort of see it, but not so much. It wasn't that obvious. But I just couldn't shake the feeling that I look like a woman. So I tried to, just kind of get that out of my head. I need to get ready for work. And by the time I was ready for work, I looked in the mirror again. And again, I was just thinking, why do I look like a woman? And that stuck with me for a while. And eventually I started thinking, I don't know how long it took, but I started thinking, oh, maybe I should detransition. And then I thought, no, 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 I'm not going to do that. And then maybe I should detransition. No, 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 I'm not going to do that. And I was really stuck between, so I didn't even at this point realize that transgenderism is bad. I just thought maybe it wasn't for me, but it also is not that bad. So maybe I'll just live like this, because I was stuck. Do I stick with this identity that I've put so much time and effort and money into? Or do I admit I was wrong about the biggest decision I've ever made in my life and hope that some of this stuff is even slightly reversible?
Right.
And so I was stuck, and I went back and forth quite a few times. I even went to, um, I went to a couple non-denominational churches. I thought maybe I should go to church. I kind of had these thoughts in my head. And then one night this was after maybe detransitioning, trying to detransition, still thinking, no, I'll just stick with the transgender thing. This was after probably months, maybe even a year of that, just going back and forth. I felt more depressed than I ever had in my life. And it was to the point where I wouldn't say I was suicidal at all, but I was not wanting to live anymore. And I was just hoping and sometimes praying that I would just die in a car wreck or something tragic like that. It would give a little bit more closure to my family members if I died that way rather than suicide. There's a whole, we could talk about that
Right.
forever. But I didn't want to do that to my family. And so I was just thinking, well, a car accident wouldn't be the worst thing. I work the night shift. It's understandable if you get in an accident late at night. And I was just kind of hoping that something like that would happen. And one night when it was the worst night at this point, it was the worst night. Already every single night, I'm not wanting to live anymore and I am just crying. And then this night, I could not stop crying. I was just laying awake in bed. It's probably the early hours of the morning, and I just could not get myself to fall asleep. I was so depressed. I was so distraught, and I didn't even know what to do. I couldn't think straight. And then all of a sudden, I had this thought just pop into my head. And it just said, "You are baptized." And I didn't know where it came from at first. I know it came from the Holy Spirit, but and I was raised in the Roman Catholic Church. And
Okay.
so I was baptized as an infant, and that was something I had my entire life. But I never really was taught to rest in my baptism. But for some reason that night I thought, yeah, I'm baptized. I'm gonna rest in that. And I took melatonin because I needed to, and I went to sleep that night. And still the next day, I kind of woke up and it was a lot. Maybe it was weeks of just wondering what I was going to do, but knowing that I'm baptized. And so things were not easier, but I was able to at least rest in something because it just felt like the whole identity that I created for myself just shattered in a day. But the baptism, it's like, whoa, that's been there for, I don't know how old I was, 20 something years old. That's been there for 20 something years and it's not gone away. So at least there was that. And I decided I would go to private confession, which I did with a priest in my neighborhood at a church I went to as a child. And even after that, I still was not sure if I would continue to be transgender. But, at least I was heading in the right direction. And then I don't know what it was, just after a while, probably months of going back and forth, I finally, was like, you know what? God made me a woman and I'm going to, I think I'm going to live like that. So I started looking online for Christian denominations that I might want to be a part of, and I came across the Lutheran Confessions, and I read it. I'm like, oh, this is perfect because a few of my thoughts when I would go to a church, I was like, well, all right, the sacraments are the sacraments, and I don't want a church to deny that, and I will not be rebaptized. Like there's no such thing as that. So if I walk into a church and that church tells me that my baptism is not valid, then they're wrong and I'm not going to go there. And then the other thing that I was thinking of, this sometimes makes people laugh. I wanted a church that was, I don't know if the word's conservative, but I think conservative fits. That was conservative enough that if I told them, I'm actually a woman, I wanted to be a man for a long time, and I still kind of looked like one at this point. Please call me Caden and call me he. They would very respectfully and lovingly say, no, you're a woman and we're going to treat you like that. But if you need a hug because that hurts, then you can have a hug. And so I I started going, I decided I would go to a confessional Lutheran church. And then I just had to figure out which church. And that's when I discovered there are a lot of different types of Lutherans. But essentially, I lived in New England, so there's actually not a lot of Lutherans out there. I'm in Wisconsin now, so they're like every time you turn around, you see a
Right.
Lutheran. But in New England, that's not the case. So it was pretty easy for me to narrow down which church I would go to. Basically, I was narrowed down, I think, to anything in fellowship or the actual churches, LCMS and Wells, and then who's ever in fellowship. I just thought these are confessional Lutheran church bodies, and that's where I want to be. And so I went to, it was an LCMS church near my work up in New Hampshire. And I sat down with the pastor. And after 90 minutes, I still didn't tell him that I was transgender. And then finally, he asked me if there's anything else I want to talk about. I told him, well, there's one thing. And this comes after he's seen me at church a few weeks in a row, but I only had men's clothing, still had short hair. So he had no idea I was a woman. I said, well, yeah, there's one more thing, Pastor, one more thing. He said, I'm actually a woman. I'm transgender. I don't know if I want to be transgender anymore. And he, in his pastoral wisdom, said, well, let's schedule another meeting then. And so we did. And he really helped me, encouraged me, did not force me, but encouraged me and loved me, and thought, hey, maybe I can start going by Katie just at church. I don't even have to admit that I was wrong to all the people in my life. Just when I come here on Sundays, maybe people will just say hi to me. They'll say, hi, Katie. And that's it. That's the first step. And I was on board with it. And every single Sunday, I would go to church, and I knew everybody's going to call me Katie, and I hated it. Felt like fingernails on a chalkboard. I would park as far away from the door as I could, and the whole walk into the church, didn't matter if it was raining, snowing, anything, I would just be preparing myself to be called Katie when I didn't want to be called Katie. And then eventually, that name, it didn't bother me anymore. It didn't hurt. The dysphoria was not popping up every time I heard my own name. So I thought, all right, that's not so bad. And then I did sort of the same thing with my clothing. I think I was updating my pastor throughout the detransition, but throughout this whole process. And the first thing I did was I bought socks from the women's section at the store. It might have even been Amazon, so I didn't even have to go to the store. And they looked like men's socks. They didn't say women's, but I knew in my mind they were women's socks. And so every single day I wore them, it felt like this mental anguish over wearing women's clothing. I had to throw away all of my men's socks because I knew if I was given the choice, I would choose the men's. So I threw away all my men's stuff and I put on the women's stuff. And eventually it just didn't bother me anymore. So I'm like, all right, maybe I can try the same thing, but with pants. Kind of buy a pair of pants that doesn't really look like men's or women's. Same thing with t-shirts, buy it that doesn't really look like men's or women's. And I just kind of did that for a while. And eventually, it took me months, but eventually I was able to wear skirts and dresses, and I started letting my hair grow out. So it seems like it was fast, but you have to realize months of just putting myself through the ringer emotionally is not easy to do.
Sure.
And the whole time I was just praying and just remembering, I'm relying on Christ's strength to pull me through this, not my own, because if it was my own,
Right.
I wasn't going to get it through. I wasn't going to get through anything.
Right. So, I mean, it sounds like you had a pretty amazing pastor. So, can
Yeah.
you tell me how, um, how did God use him to bring you along? I mean, how did catechesis go? I mean, obviously he was supportive of you as a person, as one created by God, and so I guess
Yeah.
just walk us through that a little bit.
My pastor over in New Hampshire is absolutely phenomenal. I don't know how he was able to help me so much. And he had to be very, very patient with me. He still does. He's told me before that, it's hard to give a seasoned pastor a first of something. But I have given him so many pastor firsts that it's actually impressive. But anyway, we did private catechesis together. So I would go and we have him and an associate pastor, but I think at this time we didn't have the associate pastor yet. So I would go and we would just kind of sit down, and it was pretty casual, and we would walk through the catechism, and he would teach me basically everything. And some stuff, it was similar enough to what I learned as a child that he's like, oh, all right, yeah. He said I was an advanced student. My first Lutheran Christmas, he got me for my gift the Book of Concord, told me to read it, and I did. But that took me a little bit longer than it took me to read some of the other books he was recommending to me during the couple months that we did catechesis. I think we did it every other week, the catechesis and all the instruction. And he realized, and maybe I told him, I don't know, he remembers it. I mean, if you talk to him, he remembers it. But I don't remember everything exactly. But I think he realized that I thought that my sin, being transgender and basically being given this gift from God, this healthy body, and just completely ruining so many parts of it, the parts that make it uniquely female, I just rejected and removed. I surgically removed them. They're gone. My organs have rotted somewhere. And I think he realized that I thought that that was the worst sin you could possibly commit, in that any other sin, it can't be as bad as that. I mean, maybe I was thinking, well, maybe murder, because then there's all this, but I think he was kind of thinking that I had this ranking of sins,
Mhm.
and we can kind of get into the ranking of sins and fallout and all this stuff, but he was noticing that. And so what he started to do, which was amazing, really put things in perspective for me, was he started comparing it to sins that I thought were not so bad. You know, maybe you steal something from the store down the street, or maybe something like a divorce I was not thinking was really so bad. And he's kind of talking about these other things, and he's saying, well, it's no different than this, because this is what God says, and then this is what we do when we sin. And he's just kind of going through everything and just saying, like, this is what this is, this is what this is where the transgenderism falls in. And it's just like, wow, it's all sin. It's all uh it's just all there together, and it's all something that there is one answer for, which is Christ.
Right.
So whether you steal something from a dollar store, or whether you're a serial killer, the answer is always going to be Jesus. And he just kind of put that into perspective for me. And that is something that I don't think I'd ever realized before, or ever heard before. Where, yeah, it's like the consequences of sin are going to be worse, and people are going to be affected differently, and it's going to be better or worse by different sins. But that doesn't mean the answer is different. And that that just really kind of made me see exactly how all this fits in, and that, oh, wait, so when Jesus says that I really am forgiven, and I don't have to actually do anything, I've already repented, I've already confessed the sin. So when Jesus says that I'm forgiven, he's right. Like he's telling me the truth. And so it just kind of helped solidify that for me. And I thought that was amazing. My pastor also, in helping me get away from this transgender thing, maybe he realized it, maybe he didn't, but I had this slight hatred for anything feminine, not just for me personally. I didn't like reading books written by women. I didn't like going to any women's events. I didn't even like babysitting little girls, because I just thought, well, nobody likes women. Nobody wants girls. So what's the point in it? You know, it's absurd. And I'd even asked my dad when I was a kid, did you wish that you had boys? Because they have two daughters. Me and my sister were the only two that they had. And I asked him, and he just looked so confused. And he said, I didn't really want different than what I got. And I just thought, oh, he must be lying to make me feel good because I'm a girl. I really did think that. And maybe my pastor realized it, maybe he didn't. But he invited me to um into his house, and his wife, he's got the wife, he's going to have 4 kids, but at this time he had 3 kids, but soon he'll have 4. And he invited me in, and he's got the wife and the 3 little girls. And so I start befriending them. His wife just starts loving me unconditionally, inviting me over for dinner, showing me all these different ways that women are very valuable, being like, look at all these things that I do for my family. I'm cooking, I'm cleaning, I'm raising my kids, I'm staying home with them, doing all this stuff. And then I go and I play with the kids, and I'm actually having a lot of fun, and I just grow to love them so much. Those are some of the first kids. I mean, I'm not going to say that I have ever hated a child or not loved a child, but when it comes to girls, those were some of the first ones I realized girls are worth being loved just as much as boys. Like, we're not ranking whether we want sons or daughters. This is all just absolute gifts that God gives us. And so being able to love them, and my pastor just kind of trusting me, like, you know what, you want to babysit our oldest today? Go ahead. Yeah, you could babysit. Just like trusting me with, and I'd worked with kids plenty and all that. So he knew I was to be trusted with children. It wasn't
Right.
like he was just taking a risk with this random person who walks into church. No. And they had already done my background check for VBS and all this stuff. I'd worked with children in the past. So he knew, but he was just like, yeah, just go ahead. Love my family. We're going to love you. And it was just so amazing for me. And I think that really just, them showing me the love of Christ just helped me so much to be able to recover from everything. Every time I made just a small step, my hair got a little bit longer. I tried to pull it back in a ponytail. Maybe I tried to clip it back. Maybe I tried a different shirt that was more feminine. They would just love it. And they would say, you look really good today, Katie. or his wife would help me and say, "Hey, your hair looks so good. Do you want me to show you how to clip it back?" Something like that. And I can't speak highly enough of everything that they've done for me, even the kids, if you can imagine it.
That's fantastic. So I eventually want to get to Josiah, and I want to
Yeah.
hear your take on this, because obviously this affects you. But maybe before we get there, can you just tell us how you guys met and how you ended up married?
Yeah. Do you want to tell the story?
We can tell it together.
Okay.
So
I went to, okay, my pastor, it took a lot of convincing, took a lot of fighting with his wife at 4 a.m., but he convinced me to just drive across the country with him. We were just going to do it in one straight shot. He was going to drive me from New Hampshire to Fort Wayne and just look at the seminary in Fort Wayne and just see how I felt about the deaconess program, because he had got me started with a little bit of public speaking and telling my story. I told my story at a New England pastors conference. That was the first thing I ever did, telling my story.
Okay.
And he thought maybe I'd make a good deaconess. So he kind of dragged me, but it was fine. I said yes to it, but I didn't want to go because I was not one who left New England much.
and quick note, his wife, the pastor's wife, helped fight Katie to go. Pastor and his wife did not fight each other.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, the pastor and his wife were on the same page. Pastor was like, "Well, Katie, if you don't want to go, I can't kidnap you." And so he said, "You know what? I'm going to wait in the car. And if you're not in the car in 15 minutes, then we just won't go." He didn't force me into it. So I was standing in the kitchen with his wife with my arms crossed. And I said, "I'm not going. I don't want to leave New England." She was just like, "Katie, my 3 kids are going to wake up in a few hours. It is 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm also not in the mood to fight with you." But eventually, I don't even know how they got me to do it. But I said, "All right, fine, I'll go." And like with 1 or 2 minutes to spare, I got in the car and I said, "We're going to go." And I don't think I talked to my pastor until we were through Ohio. And I was like, "Whoa, this part of the country is flat." And yeah, and then we made it to Fort Wayne, and I was going to tell my story after doing the prayerfully consider visit for the deaconess program. But you can tell this part. Right before I was going to tell my story, I saw him in chapel at the evening prayer service.
Mm-hmm. So I went to the evening prayer service. She saw me first. I did not see her until after the service. So she had her initial impression. I got my first look at her after the prayer. I was coming around because I wanted to talk to a friend, and I saw her standing kind of up against the wall there. And I said, "Ooh, it's a nice looking young lady who I've never seen before on campus." Did a quick ring check, as pretty much all seminary and bachelors do when they see a young lady, and like, "Oh, she's not married." File that away under possible use later. But I wasn't really thinking very much at the time. I was thinking, I got to talk to my friend, and then I got a dorm meeting, and then I'm going to be going to this fireside chat,
Which I was doing.
I didn't realize that was her. And so and I was waiting for my friend. I did talk to her briefly, like, "So what are you doing here?" And then I felt I was a little rude. So I was like, "Let me try that again. What brings you to Fort Wayne?"
Yeah. And then I told him that I'm doing the fireside chat, and he said, "Oh, that's you."
Mm-hmm.
He's like, yeah, but I already did kind of like him. I already was thinking, I wonder if he's married, because I would like to marry him. I was already, but then at the fireside chat, I started giving my talk, and he was late because of the dorm meeting. And I was kind of looking around while I was speaking and telling my story, hoping that I would see the guy in the bow tie. That's how I knew him. It was like, all right, I hope the guy in the bow tie comes here. And then I'm talking and talking and talking. He came in late, but I saw that he got there just a few minutes late. And so I saw him, and I was so happy, but also I just needed to be serious and give my talk.
Right.
And then afterward, a lot of people were talking to me, which is great because I always like it when people come after and they ask me questions. But I was still, every time somebody would ask me something, I was scanning the room to see if he was still there. And he was kind of lurking in the corner, waiting to talk to me.
Mm-hmm. I was waiting. Again, I was not thinking about trying to pick her up or anything like that. I had already at this point, I'd had the experience of getting to stand in line with a pastor after having given a sermon and stuff. And so often what you hear after having shared God's word with people, there's people coming up and they say, thank you. They say, that was wonderful. You've made my day. They're very supportive. But what you don't always get to hear is Jesus died for you too. Right. You also are baptized. And that's something that we all need to hear. And so after she gave her talk, I wanted to just offer her that courtesy of just like, hey, you're baptized. Your baptism is from Jesus and it's for you, just because it's good to hear. And I know that and I knew that she would hear it from her pastor and stuff, but.
Yeah. And then we talked about everything we love: trains, airplanes, naval ships, and old coins, before he finally asked me for my number. And then we ended up getting married like 7 months later or something like that. Wow. Yeah, seminarians are quick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we're a little older. We're not like in our early 20s.
Sure.
But yeah. So it's she saw me in the seminary. She saw me in the chapel, said, like, I want to talk to that guy. And we just have never stopped talking.
Right. So Josiah, obviously her past affects you as her husband. She's had the hysterectomy. And so, I mean, just tell us how you deal with this personally and how that affects you guys together as husband and wife.
It does affect us, but I don't know if the way that it affects us is as unique as some people might initially assume. I think one of the most seductive lies that the devil puts before us is he tells us that there's this magical arrangement or place or way that we can get ourselves oriented where if we just are there, then everything will be easy. Well, I will identify that, okay, I'm an extrovert, so I need to be in a situation where I'm always having a lot of friends I can talk to. Or I'm an introvert. I need to have a cabin out in the middle of nowhere where no one can find me. And if I can just get into that right niche, then I will be okay. And really what that's about is if I can get into the right niche, then I don't have to rely on Jesus. I can just stand on my own 2 feet and I don't need nothing from no one. And we think that's what's going to make us happy. Kind of what makes Katie's situation unique is the fact that we don't really get the luxury of pretending that we don't need Jesus. Yeah. The scars of sin are reminded for both of us every time, Katie, if you hear it in her voice, it's in her body. The fact that we can't get pregnant and have children that way. Those things are hard, but those are also the things that Christ died on the cross to save. And that's not really any different than for a couple who is like, oh, my husband has bad breath. How in the world am I going to love him when I don't want to kiss him sometimes? Well, Jesus died for that sin too. It seems paltry in comparison, but it's still, you don't ever get out of relying on Jesus. And I think it's in 2 Corinthians. I should have had that one bookmarked too. Paul's writing about all the suffering that they've been going through.
Right.
Yeah. So, for we do not want you to be unaware, brothers, of the affliction we experienced in Asia, for we were so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt we had received the sentence of death, but that was to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. So sometimes you feel like, okay, I've been handed this incredible burden. Like this thing's either going to just break me or it's going to kill me. And you think, how in the world am I going to get through that? But that's exactly why God allows those things to happen. So that you realize, okay, I'm looking all in myself, all my talents, my abilities, and I'm not enough. Where can I get more? Well, Christ.
Right.
I would say that there's probably been no greater joy in my life in the fact that having Katie by my side is such a clear reminder of that Christ is enough and that he is for us.
That's fabulous. That's fabulous. So I mean, part of your story, Katie, revolves around identity, and maybe an identity crisis. And even with you, Josiah, I mean, I'm trying to find a way to ask this, but like, how how do you view her? Like, has that affected the way that you see her? Or, I mean, I guess I'm trying to get at where does our identity really lie, right?
Mhm. One of our first conversations that we were going to have, when we first, after we exchanged numbers, we were texting a bunch. And then I wanted to have a phone call because I'm a slow texter. I'm an older millennial. I can't. She can do the whole dual wielding
Right.
thumb thing. I'm like a hunt and peck kind of guy. So I wanted to have a voice chat, like just talking over the phone. And she at first was nervous, and she asked me, "Do you mind if I share this?"
No, I don't mind.
She said, "You just have to promise that you won't hate my voice." And I was like, "Well, why would I hate your voice?" It's like, "Well, because it's been affected by the testosterone. It's a reminder of where I've been and everything." And so what I told her, what I texted her is like, "Katie, your voice is baptized. And I find actually your voice now to be beautiful. Like, I mean, I wish it hadn't happened to her, but the fact that she's baptized, the scars, you know, those point to the cross. That's what we all do as Christians. As Paul didn't hide the fact that he was a sinner. He boasted in it, not as an encouragement of sin, but as a testimony to the faithfulness of Christ despite all of his unworthiness. And so with Katie, I just get to be reminded that I see her and it's like, yeah, just as broken as she may have been at any of the lowest points in her lives, I've been the same way. Like, but I just get to pretend otherwise. It's a little easier for me to hide it. But it's not any more hidden before God. And the healing
Right.
is just as real.
Right. I think there are probably in every person's life, there are things that we wish we could undo, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I could do that again, I wouldn't do it. And God doesn't give us that choice, right? We don't get to redo it. We just have to kind of deal with where we are and what we've done. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and yet he still blesses us through that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you've kind of already done this, but walk us through some of those blessings. I mean, how has God, even though we can't go and redo our lives, obviously God is still, redeemed you and redeemed your situation. And so what are some of the blessings you found?
And obviously one of the first ones was being able to go to that church in New Hampshire that I talked about and have that pastor sharing the word of God with me and receiving the sacrament and everything there. Some of the other, I think one of the biggest blessings that the whole transition really without it, this wouldn't have happened, even though I always like to say, well, I wish I didn't transition. Right now, I've been able to help and have conversations with so many, it's mostly parents, sometimes grandparents or aunts and uncles of children and young adults who are going through the transgender process and being able to pray with them and pray for them, point them toward support groups and pastors, and just make sure that they have what they need. Recently, I was working with the Office of National Mission, and we were able to get a document published through them that's on the LCMS website. And it's the most common questions I receive from parents and some of the biblical answers to those questions. And I think that just being able to share my story and share the hope that I have in Christ has helped so many people just kind of reorient them toward Christ, point them in the direction of pastoral care. And I mean, there have been so many more blessings from this whole thing than I think the downside. I don't.
Well, I mean, Christ doesn't lose. So, of course,
Yeah,
his victory is going to be greater than the devil's temporary setbacks. That is such a typical Katie answer, and it's one of the things I so love about you because, of course, she's like, "What is the greatest blessing? Oh, I get to love more people." That's
Right.
essentially what she's like. That's the
Yeah.
greatest blessing. The number of people I get to love. I would think I'll say this because I think it will be useful for people to hear. You notice that in her talk before, when she's talking about how she was transitioning, and she that euphoria and that joy. The whole time she's downsliding, it felt good, but at the same time, especially if you get to talk to her as much as I have, you'll pick up on the fact that a lot of things started to become more shallow. Her relationships with her family and her friends were all of a sudden a lot more conditional. Hold on a second, you're not going to affirm my identity? Well, I don't want you in my life anymore. That kind of attitude. But when Christ kind of took the wheel and she started to recover, now she's going through a lot more pain. She's feeling all that has been lost, but at the same time, she's able to see things and take joy in things that she never did before. She was able for the first time to look at young girls and see them as not something to be pitied or disdained, but actually, this is a good thing that God has made them and for them to be this way.
Yeah, I have more depth, you can say, which
Sure.
means both the bad things and the good things are going to be felt even more. So like before, I think if you would have done the law gospel thing, it would have been like, okay, yeah, okay, law, okay, gospel. And now it's like it just hits so much harder. And it only continues to do that as I grow in faith. And it's like, whoa, this is becoming a lot. But
Yeah. So can you just really briefly, and we can maybe wrap up with a couple of final things here, but what's the name of the resource you've got available on the LCMS website?
it's called Lost in Error's Maze, which is
Okay.
a quote from one of the hymns in the Lutheran service book. And it is, I believe the subtitle is a compassionate guide for parents, maybe dealing with the transgender issue. I don't remember exactly. I totally should have had it in front of me for you.
Sure, that's
But
okay.
as of a few days ago, it was on the LCMS homepage.
Okay.
And I think if you were to do a search on the LCMS website, Lost in Error's Maze, it would come up.
Okay. Wonderful. So my last question for you, and you can both answer this if you want to, but I mean, if there's one thing that you could tell a young person considering this, or it could be a parent going through it, but if there's one thing that now on the other side of this, looking back at it, what would you tell them?
Well, I would probably tell them Jesus loves you. And kind of like how my pastor did for me, if they ever feel like they're worse than most other people, and say, listen, the answer is all the same for sin. The answer is Christ. And if it's a young person who's actually experiencing this, what else I might want to add is just that sometimes our feelings are not in line with reality, and what God says about us is more important and more truthful than what we will ever say about ourselves.
Sure.
Do you have something else?
I think that's a pretty good summary. I might also just say that having myself lived for a time, kind of in what I call the land of ifs, where everything is conditional.
Yeah.
If you do this, I'll love you. If you do that, then I won't. That is a really hard place to stay. And it'll feel great when you get the things you want, but it will haul you out, whether you're getting what you want or you don't get what you want. Christ is the rock that doesn't come with an if. He comes with a for you. For you, all that he has done has been done, that he did. And he will, through him being crucified on the cross, give you all that you need. So whatever it is the world is lying to you about, saying, if you get this, then that'll make you happy. It's a lie. Christ is more than enough.
Amen. Well, thank you both for joining us for this. I appreciate you very much. Thankful to God that He's brought you through this and got you to this point. And I thank you not just for being with us, but for having the courage to share your story. And so thank you again. God's blessings to you both. And thank you, everybody, for watching. God bless you all. And I hope that this video has equipped you to continue to be that gospel motivated voice for life. So thank you for joining us.